Daniel was not a man who had much in life, but he was a man who loved with all his heart. Every morning, long before the sun painted the sky with soft colors, he woke up in his tiny apartment to the sound of his daughter's gentle breathing. She was only 7, a little girl with bright eyes and an endless curiosity about the world. Her name was Lily, and she was the reason Daniel kept pushing through every hard day. His life had not been easy. Years ago, he had lost his wife to illness, and from that moment on, the weight of raising a child fell on his shoulders alone. He never complained, though the pain of loss still stayed with him like a shadow. He worked at a small mechanic shop on the edge of town, fixing broken cars for people who often wanted quick work but paid little. The pay was not enough to make life comfortable, but it kept food on the table and allowed Lily to go to school with clean clothes and a small lunch packed with care. Daniel's hands were always stained with grease, his shirts worn out from long hours of labor. Still, when he looked at his daughter smile, none of that mattered. She was the light that guided him through dark days. At night, even when he returned home exhausted, he found the strength to read her stories, listen to her laughter, and promise her that tomorrow would be brighter. Deep inside, however, Daniel often worried about the future. He wondered if he could keep up with the rising costs of life. He wished he could give Lily more, new shoes instead of patched ones, a bigger room instead of a corner of their cramped apartment, and toys she sometimes saw in shop windows, but never asked for because she knew her father could not afford them. Yet despite all these worries, Daniel kept moving forward, powered by love. One chilly morning, Daniel decided to take a rare day off. The shop owner had allowed him a break since work was slow that week. It felt unusual for him to stay away from the noise of clinking tools and roaring engines, but he wanted to spend the whole day with Lily. She had been asking for a trip to the Riverside Park, a place they visited only once in a while because it was a little far. Daniel saved up just enough money to buy some sandwiches, juice boxes, and bus fare, and with that, he planned a simple but joyful outing. When Daniel told Lily about the trip, her eyes sparkled like tiny stars. She jumped into his arms, hugging him tightly. "Really, Daddy? We're going to the park today?" she asked with excitement. Daniel nodded with a tired but happy smile. "Yes, sweetheart, just you and me." For a child, it was more than enough. She didn't care about expensive toys or fancy places. She only cared about the time her father gave her. The park by the river had always been special for them. It was where Lily learned to ride her little bike with training wheels, and where they often fed ducks pieces of bread while sitting by the water. Daniel packed their small bag and held Lily's tiny hand as they walked toward the bus stop. The autumn wind carried the smell of dry leaves, and the streets buzzed with people rushing to work. For Daniel, however, this was a rare chance to slow down and just enjoy a day with his daughter. On the way, Daniel noticed Lily staring at a toy shop's window. There was a beautiful doll dressed in a pink gown displayed behind the glass. He saw her eyes linger on it, but she didn't say a word. She simply held his hand tighter and smiled up at him. Daniel's heart ached a little at her silence. She had learned too early to hide her wishes because she understood their struggles. He bent down, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Someday, I'll get you something even prettier than that." She nodded, trusting his words. When they reached the Riverside Park, the air was cool and refreshing. Families were scattered around, children playing, and the sound of laughter filled the atmosphere. Daniel and Lily sat on the grass, shared their simple sandwiches, and watched the water flow gently under the bridge. Daniel felt peace for the first time in weeks. He closed his eyes for a moment, listening to his daughter hum softly, and thought to himself how blessed he was, even with so little. As they walked along the path near the road that ran beside the river, Daniel lifted Lily onto his shoulders so she could see the tall trees better. She giggled and clapped her hands, pointing at birds flying across the sky. For that brief moment, everything felt perfect. The worries of unpaid bills, the long hours of work, and the loneliness of being a single father seemed to fade into the background. But life has a way of changing in an instant, often without warning. Daniel had no idea that this peaceful day, meant only for simple happiness, was about to test him in ways he had never imagined. Just beyond the curve of the road, hidden from his sight for the moment, danger was approaching. A danger that would not only put lives at risk, but also alter his own future forever. The river sparkled in the morning light as Daniel walked hand in hand with Lily, enjoying the sound of her laughter. He felt lighter than he had in weeks. For once there was no noise of machines, no ringing phones, no boss rushing him. It was just a father and his daughter enjoying the peace of the riverside. But peace has a way of breaking suddenly. As they moved closer to the road, Daniel heard a strange sound, a screeching noise that didn't belong in such a calm place. At first, he thought it might just be a car braking too hard. But the sound grew louder, sharper, and more frightening. He turned his head just in time to see a large yellow bus racing down the road. The bus was tilting slightly, swerving left and right, as if the driver had lost control. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He could see the wide eyes of the driver through the windshield, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The bus roared forward, metal grinding, and Daniel realized with horror that the brakes had failed. Inside the bus were children, their faces pressed against the windows, some crying, some screaming. Their small hands beat against the glass as the heavy vehicle sped closer to the edge of the road. Daniel froze for a moment, unable to believe what he was seeing. "Daddy, what's happening?" Lily whispered, clutching his hand tightly. Her voice shook, filled with fear. Daniel quickly pulled her to the side, away from the road. His heart pounded so loudly he could hardly hear the rest of the world. The bus skidded violently, wheels screeching, and then it crashed against the railing that separated the road from the river. For a second it seemed like the railing would hold, but with a loud crack the metal gave way and the heavy bus tipped forward. The screams grew louder as the bus plunged into the river with a thunderous splash. Water shot high into the air, crashing back down in waves. In an instant, the peaceful riverbank turned into a scene of chaos. The bus bobbed once, then began to sink, the cold water rushing in through the broken windows. Daniel stood frozen for only a second, his mind racing. He could see little faces inside, pressed against the glass, desperate to get out. He could hear muffled cries, children banging on the windows, their voices drowning in the sound of water rushing inside. Time seemed to slow, but deep inside Daniel knew he didn't have a choice. He couldn't just stand there. He turned to Lily, kneeling down to her level. His hands shook as he grabbed her shoulders. "Lily, listen to me. Stay here on the grass. Don't move, okay? Daddy has to help them." Her eyes widened in panic, tears forming. "No, Daddy." "Don't go," she cried, her small hands clinging to his arm. Daniel hugged her tightly, kissing her hair. "I'll come back, I promise." "Be brave for me, sweetheart." He gently but firmly placed her near a group of people who had gathered, shocked by the accident. A woman standing nearby reached out to hold Lily, assuring Daniel she would watch her. Without another thought, Daniel kicked off his shoes and ran straight toward the river. The water was freezing as he dove in, the cold cutting through his body like knives. He pushed himself forward, fighting against the heavy current created by the sinking bus. His lungs burned, but his determination was stronger. As he reached the side of the bus, he saw children trapped inside, their little faces pale with fear. Some had their hands against the glass, others huddled together in the rising water. Daniel's chest tightened with urgency. He tried the nearest window, but it wouldn't budge. He pulled harder, the metal cutting into his hands, until finally, with all his strength, he managed to force it open enough to reach inside. "Come on, grab my hand," he shouted, though his voice was muffled by the rush of water and cries. A boy no older than 10 reached out trembling. Daniel pulled him through the window and pushed him toward the surface. He turned back quickly, grabbing another child, a girl crying uncontrollably, helping her squeeze through. One by one, Daniel pulled as many children as he could, guiding them toward the shore where other people were beginning to help. His muscles screamed with pain, his breath short, but he couldn't stop. Every second mattered. The bus was sinking deeper, water now covering more than half of it. Then he heard it, a faint cry coming from the very back of the bus. He dove under, pushing himself through the narrow opening. Inside, the water was icy and dark. He could barely see, but in the shadows he spotted them. 2 small children clinging to each other, their eyes wide with terror. Twins. A boy and a girl. They were trapped against the back seat, the rising water almost up to their necks. Daniel's heart pounded harder. He swam toward them, motioning for them to come. But they were frozen in fear, too shocked to move. Daniel reached out, pulling the boy first, then the girl. Their tiny hands held onto him desperately, as if their lives depended on it, which they did. With both children in his arms, Daniel pushed toward the window. His chest ached, his lungs begged for air, but he kept going. He forced the twins through the opening one by one, then followed, gasping as he broke through the surface. He held them tightly, their sobs muffled against his wet shirt. The crowd on the shore cheered as they saw him rise from the water with the children. Hands reached out to help pull the twins to safety. Daniel, exhausted, could hardly keep himself afloat, but he managed to swim back to the edge, dragging his tired body out of the water. He collapsed on the grass, coughing and shivering, but relieved that the children were safe. Around him, chaos turned to relief as more rescuers jumped in to help. The sound of sirens filled the air as emergency vehicles arrived. Parents ran frantically, searching for their children. Daniel lay on the ground, soaked and trembling, but his heart swelled with the knowledge that he had saved lives. Then he felt small arms around him. Lily had broken free from the woman holding her and ran straight to her father. She hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I was so scared, Daddy," she sobbed. Daniel wrapped his arms around her, whispering through his own tears, "It's okay now, sweetheart. Daddy's here." As he held his daughter, Daniel glanced at the twins he had rescued. They were being comforted by rescuers, their faces pale but safe. He didn't know who they were or where they came from. To him, they were just children in danger who needed someone to step in. What Daniel didn't know was that saving those twins would soon lead him into a future he never could have imagined. Daniel sat on the cold grass, his clothes soaked through, his body trembling from the freezing river water. His breaths came in short gasps, and every muscle in his arms and legs burned with pain. Yet when he looked toward the children gathered safely on the riverbank, he felt a deep relief wash over him. They were alive. That was all that mattered. Lily sat beside him, clinging to his arm as if she would never let go again. Her small face was pressed against his wet shirt, her tears mixing with the drops of water dripping from his hair. Daniel gently stroked her back, whispering softly, "It's okay now. Everything's all right." His own voice was weak, but he tried to sound steady for her sake. The sound of sirens grew louder. Within minutes, police cars and ambulances filled the road near the river. Paramedics rushed with stretchers, checking on the children one by one. Some were coughing, others shivering, but all of them were alive. Daniel's chest swelled with quiet pride. He had done what he could. "Sir, are you all right?" A paramedic bent down, checking his pulse. Daniel nodded weakly, though his body screamed with exhaustion. "I'm fine, just tired," he whispered. The paramedic handed him a blanket and guided him to sit against a tree. Lily followed closely, refusing to leave her father's side. Nearby, the twins Daniel had pulled from the back of the bus were being wrapped in warm towels. They were still crying softly, holding hands tightly, refusing to let go of each other. Their identical faces showed fear but also relief. A police officer crouched beside them, trying to calm them down, asking for their names. But the children were too shaken to answer properly. Reporters began to arrive, cameras flashing, microphones pushing forward as they tried to capture the story. People were already murmuring about the man who had jumped in without hesitation, risking his life to save others. Some pointed toward Daniel, their voices filled with admiration. "That's him," someone said. "That's the man who pulled the kids out." Daniel, however, lowered his head. He didn't want attention. He hadn't done it for praise, and he didn't feel like a hero. To him it was simple. Those children needed help, and he was there. Anyone with a heart would have done the same, he told himself. He hugged Lily closer, trying to block out the noise of the cameras and questions. As the crowd buzzed with excitement, a black car screeched to a halt near the police barricade. The door swung open and a tall, elegant woman stepped out. She wore a dark coat, her hair neatly tied back, but her face was pale with worry. Her heels clicked against the pavement as she rushed forward, her eyes scanning the scene desperately. "Where are they? My children? Where are my children?" she cried out, her voice trembling. The twins, hearing the familiar voice, turned their heads. "Mommy!" they shouted in unison. The woman's eyes filled with tears as she ran toward them, dropping to her knees and gathering them into her arms. She kissed their wet faces, holding them so tightly it seemed she would never let go again. "Oh, thank God. Thank God you're safe," she whispered, her voice breaking. The crowd watched quietly as the reunion unfolded. The elegant woman was no ordinary mother. Even from a distance, people recognized her face. Isabella Hart, a name that often appeared in newspapers and magazines. She was a powerful businesswoman, one of the wealthiest in the city, but in that moment none of her wealth or influence mattered. She was simply a mother, crying and clutching her children after nearly losing them. The twins pointed toward Daniel. "Mommy, he saved us," the little girl whispered. Isabella turned her head, her tear-filled eyes falling on the man sitting quietly under the tree with his daughter. For a moment she just stared, her chest rising and falling quickly. Then standing up, she walked toward him. Daniel noticed her approach but looked down quickly, uncomfortable with the sudden attention. His hands gripped the blanket tightly, his face flushed with embarrassment. Lily, sensing the tension, squeezed his hand. "Are you the one who pulled my children out of that bus?" Isabella's voice was soft but firm. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. I just did what anyone would have done," he murmured. His voice was hoarse, his body still weak. Isabella knelt down in front of him, her eyes shining with gratitude. "No, not anyone." People stood there shocked, frozen. "But you went in. You risked your life for children you didn't even know. I can never thank you enough." Daniel shook his head quickly. "You don't have to thank me, I couldn't watch them drown. They're kids. I have a daughter and I just thought, what if it were her?" He looked down at Lily, who was now leaning against him, her eyes wide as she listened. Isabella's gaze softened as she looked at Lily. She could see the little girl's worn shoes, her faded dress, and the way she clung to her father with unshakable trust. In that instant, Isabella felt something stir inside her, a connection she couldn't quite explain. The reporters had gathered around, capturing every word. Questions flew through the air, but Isabella ignored them. Her attention was fully on Daniel. "You saved the most precious part of my life," she whispered. "I will never forget this." Daniel, overwhelmed, only nodded. He wasn't sure what to say. He was just an ordinary man, a struggling single father. The woman kneeling before him was someone from a completely different world, a world of wealth, power, and influence. He never imagined their paths would cross, and certainly not like this. The paramedics soon insisted on taking the children and Daniel to the hospital for checkups. The twins needed warmth and care after nearly drowning, and Daniel, despite his protests, was weak from the cold water and strain. Isabella insisted on accompanying them, never letting go of her children's hands. As they rode together in the ambulance, Lily sat on Daniel's lap, her head resting against his chest. Across from them, the twins leaned against their mother, still shaken but slowly calming down. Isabella's eyes flicked toward Daniel more than once, studying him quietly. He looked exhausted, his face pale, his clothes torn and dripping. Yet there was a strength in his eyes that left her speechless. For the first time in many years, Isabella Hart, the billionaire known for her sharp mind and commanding presence, felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, deep gratitude toward a stranger. She didn't know it yet, but this man's bravery would not only save her children, it would also change her own life in ways she could not yet imagine. Daniel, unaware of the impact he had made, simply closed his eyes for a moment, holding his daughter close. To him, this day had already given him more than he expected. He was just grateful the children were safe. Little did he know, his story was only beginning. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft beeping of machines and the steady hum of air conditioning. Daniel sat on the edge of a bed, still wrapped in a clean hospital gown after doctors insisted he change out of his wet clothes. His body felt heavy, every muscle sore, but his mind was calm knowing Lily was safe beside him, fast asleep on a chair with a blanket covering her small body. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and smiled gently. Even in sleep, she clutched his hand tightly. Across the hallway, the twins were being checked by nurses. Daniel caught glimpses of them whenever the door opened, the little boy and girl still holding onto their mother's hands. Isabella never left their side. She sat with her children close, whispering to them softly, kissing their foreheads, as if afraid they might slip away if she let go. When the doctors finally declared the twins stable, Isabella walked down the hallway. Her footsteps were quiet, but Daniel noticed her immediately. She stood at the door, looking at him with eyes full of something he couldn't name, part gratitude, part curiosity, and something softer that she wasn't used to showing. "May I come in?" she asked politely. Daniel nodded, shifting slightly to make room. Isabella stepped into the small room, her elegant coat neatly draped over her arm. Even in a plain hospital corridor, she carried herself with the grace of someone who belonged in boardrooms and photographs. Yet now she looked different, more human, more vulnerable. "I wanted to thank you again," she began, her voice steady but low. "The doctors say my children are safe because of you. If you hadn't been there..." She paused, her throat tightening. I can't even finish that thought. Daniel shook his head. Please don't thank me. Anyone would have done it. I just happened to be there. Not anyone, Isabella replied firmly. Most people froze. They couldn't move, but you didn't think twice. You went in. She glanced at Lily, who stirred slightly in her sleep, then looked back at Daniel. And you did it knowing you had a child of your own waiting for you. Daniel didn't know how to respond. He felt his face warm under her gaze. When I saw those kids in the bus, he said softly, I thought of her. I thought of what I would want someone to do if it were my daughter. That gave me the strength. Isabella's eyes softened, and for a moment silence filled the room. She studied the tired man in front of her, his calloused hands, the lines on his face, the way he held his daughter even in sleep. He didn't look like a man with much, but he carried himself with a dignity that touched her heart. I don't usually do this, she said finally, but I would like to do something for you. Anything you need, please tell me. Money, work, school for your daughter, whatever it is, I can help. Daniel straightened, uncomfortable with her words. I don't want anything, he said quickly. I didn't save your children for a reward. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Isabella tilted her head, studying him. I know. That's what makes me want to help even more. For the next few days, Daniel and Isabella saw each other often at the hospital. While their children rested, they would sit in the waiting area and talk. At first, the conversations were short and polite. Questions about the children, updates from doctors, simple thanks. But slowly, the talks grew longer, warmer. Daniel learned that Isabella, despite her wealth, lived a very lonely life. She was a widow, her husband having passed away years ago, leaving her to raise the twins alone while managing a massive company. She had success, fame, and influence, but she confessed quietly that she often went home to an empty mansion, feeling like all her achievements meant little compared to the love she lost. Daniel, in return, shared his own struggles. He told her about his work at the mechanic shop, the endless bills, the nights he went without sleep because he worried about Lily's future. He admitted how hard it was to raise a child alone without much help. Isabella listened carefully, never once looking down on him. Instead, she admired his strength and the love he had for his daughter. Their children, meanwhile, became fast friends. Lily and the twins spent hours together in the hospital's small play area, laughing and sharing stories. They drew pictures with crayons, exchanged snacks, and played simple games, their bond growing naturally. Seeing them together made Isabella and Daniel smile in ways they hadn't in years. One afternoon, as they watched their children play, Isabella said softly, It's strange, isn't it? Our lives are so different, yet somehow we've been brought together. Daniel nodded. Life has a way of surprising us. I never expected any of this. I only wanted to give my daughter a nice day at the park. And now, he trailed off, unsure of how to put his feelings into words. And now, Isabella finished for him. You've become part of a story I'll never forget. There was a warmth in her tone that made Daniel's chest tighten. He quickly looked away, focusing on Lily's laughter. He wasn't a man used to kindness from strangers, especially not from someone like Isabella. When the doctors finally discharged the twins, Isabella invited Daniel and Lily to her home for dinner as a way of thanking them. Daniel hesitated, feeling out of place at the thought of stepping into a billionaire's mansion. But Lily's excitement convinced him. Please, Daddy, I want to see my new friends again, she begged. That evening, Daniel found himself walking through the grand doors of Isabella's estate. The mansion was breathtaking, with chandeliers hanging from the ceiling and polished floors that reflected the lights. Yet what struck Daniel most wasn't the wealth, it was the emptiness. Despite the beauty, the house felt quiet and lonely, a place filled with luxury but lacking warmth. Over dinner, the children's laughter filled the halls, and for once the house felt alive. Isabella watched them with tears in her eyes, grateful not only for their safety but also for the unexpected joy Daniel and Lily had brought into their lives. As the night drew to a close, Isabella walked Daniel to the door. You may think you don't deserve help, she said softly, but I believe fate brought us together for a reason. Let me be part of your journey, just as you became part of mine. Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked down at Lily, her eyes glowing with happiness as she waved goodbye to the twins. He realized that something had begun to change, not just for him but for all of them. And though he didn't know what the future held, He felt a strange sense of hope he hadn't felt in years. Weeks passed since the accident at the river, yet the memory of that day stayed sharp in Daniel's mind. Sometimes at night he would wake suddenly, remembering the sound of metal crashing and children screaming. But then he would see Lily sleeping peacefully beside him, safe and warm, and he would remind himself that all had ended well. For Isabella, life also began to change. Before the accident, her days were filled only with meetings, phone calls, and long hours spent managing her company. Her evenings were quiet, her large house echoing with silence even when her children were home. But now things felt different. Her twins often asked to see Lily, and in truth, Isabella herself found reasons to see Daniel. She told herself it was only gratitude, but deep inside she knew it was more. Daniel, though humble, could not deny the small changes either. Isabella insisted on helping in little ways at first. She arranged for Lily to receive new school supplies, something Daniel had struggled to afford. She offered to send a driver to take Lily to school, but Daniel politely refused, saying he wanted his daughter to live simply, not differently from her friends. Isabella respected that, but her admiration for him grew. Their friendship blossomed slowly, naturally. Isabella would sometimes stop by the mechanic shop, surprising Daniel with coffee while he worked. At first his co-workers teased him, joking that he had a secret admirer, but Daniel brushed it off. He didn't think of Isabella that way, not yet. To him, she was a kind woman whose children he had saved, nothing more. But every time she smiled at him, something in his heart stirred. The children became inseparable. On weekends, the twins and Lily played in the park, ran through Isabella's gardens, or sat in Daniel's small apartment, drawing pictures and laughing until their cheeks hurt. Watching them, both Daniel and Isabella often found themselves sharing quiet conversations, discovering how much they had in common despite their different worlds. One evening, Isabella invited Daniel and Lily to a charity event her company was hosting. Daniel almost refused, embarrassed at the thought of standing among wealthy people in his worn suit. But Lily begged him, and Isabella gently insisted, assuring him that he belonged there more than anyone. The event was held in a grand hall, glittering with lights and filled with people in elegant clothes. Daniel felt out of place, his rough hands gripping the edge of his old jacket. But when Isabella introduced him to everyone as the man who saved my children, the entire room erupted in applause. Daniel's face turned red with embarrassment, but he noticed the pride shining in Lily's eyes. That alone made the moment worth it. Later that night, as the event quieted down, Isabella found Daniel standing on the balcony, gazing at the city lights. "You looked uncomfortable in there," she said gently. Daniel shrugged. "I don't belong in a place like this. I fix cars, I live in a small apartment, and I barely get by. People in there live in a different world." Isabella stepped closer, her voice soft. "Daniel, you belong anywhere your heart takes you. What you did for my children is worth more than all the money in that room. Don't ever think you're less than anyone." Her words touched him deeply. He turned to look at her, their eyes meeting under the glow of the city lights. For a moment, the noise of the world faded away, and all he saw was a woman who, despite her wealth, carried the same loneliness he did. From that day, their bond grew stronger. Isabella began to include Daniel and Lily in her family outings. Sometimes it was a picnic in the park, other times a visit to the countryside. Each time, the children laughed together, and Daniel and Isabella found themselves sharing smiles and quiet glances that said more than words could. Daniel often wondered if he was dreaming. He had spent years struggling, believing his life would never be more than long hours at the shop and small joys with Lily. Yet now, he found himself in the company of a woman who not only respected him, but seemed to truly care for him. Still, a part of him held back. He worried about the difference in their worlds, about whether he could ever fit into hers. One evening, as they watched their children chase fireflies in Isabella's garden, she turned to Daniel. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think I had everything. A big house, money, success. But I was wrong. None of it mattered without someone to share it with. My children gave me love, but there was still an emptiness. That day at the river, you not only saved them, you gave me something I didn't realize I was missing, hope." Daniel felt his chest tighten. He looked at her, unsure what to say, but the sincerity in her voice left him speechless. In time, Isabella's feelings became clear. She didn't just want to thank Daniel anymore. She wanted him to be part of her life. She admired his honesty, his courage, and most of all, his devotion to his daughter. He was unlike anyone she had ever known in her world of wealth and power. For Daniel, it wasn't easy to accept. He often lay awake at night wondering if he was worthy of her. But every time he saw how her twins adored Lily, how Isabella treated his daughter with kindness, and how naturally their families blended, he began to believe that maybe this was meant to be. Months later, their bond had grown into something undeniable. They were no longer just two parents brought together by an accident. They were friends, partners, and slowly something more. The children spoke of each other as if they were already family, and their laughter filled both Daniel's small apartment and Isabella's grand mansion with warmth. One quiet afternoon, as they all sat by the riverside, the same place where their story began, Isabella looked at Daniel and whispered, "You changed my life. You gave me back more than my children that day. You gave me a reason to believe in second chances." Daniel, with Lily curled up beside him, took her hand gently. "Maybe life was waiting for us to find each other," he said softly. The river flowed calmly before them, the sun setting in a sky painted with gold. The children played nearby, their voices ringing with joy, and for the first time in many years, Daniel felt complete. He was no longer just a poor single dad struggling alone. He was a father, a hero, and now perhaps a man who had found love again. His act of courage had not only saved lives, it had changed his own forever.